works to reduce gun violence through education, Ask program, Ask Who Saves Kids, suicide prevention, the gun turn-in. Ceasefire Oregon works to reduce gun violence through advocacy and legislation, and it's really my honor to be sitting next to this man who was really the key person in so many ways. You just wouldn't believe it, behind saving a lot of lives. He's Senator Prozanski. So I'm honored to
everyone for letting me be here to participate. Floyd Prozanski, I'm a state senator. I represent parts of Lane and Douglas County. I've had the opportunity to work on this issue for a number of years. Jeannie Burdick, who when I went into the Senate, she was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and she's been a very, very strong advocate of dealing with gun violence and gun safety issues and regulations. She tasked me when she was moving into the revenue chairship to take over what she had started, and I had the opportunity as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee to take this issue up on multiple occasions. We had 3 bills over the last 3 years. Took this last one, Senate Bill 941, was the one that actually got across the finish line. But over the 2 previous years' sessions that we had, we set and laid the framework, and when we had the correct number of members in the caucus, 18 versus 16, it allowed us to actually have that discussion on not only in a serious way, but actually take it to the floor and get the votes that we needed. Clearly, I think it's important just for me to just say there's been a lot of misunderstandings as to what Senate Bill 941 did. There are 3 components to it, and I'll just talk about 2 of those. Well, I'll talk about all 3 real quick. The first one is, that was the most simple, is that we had an executive order under John Kitzhaber that basically said that if someone is attempting to purchase a gun and they were denied because of a failure of a background check or other reasons, that information was to be given from the state police firearms unit to the local sheriff or city police for them to be able to do follow-up. So the one component of the 941 was basically codify that into statute instead of having it as an executive order. And we had that go into effect immediately upon signature by the governor, which is Kate Brown, who signed the bill in May. The second portion of the bill that also went into effect on immediately was something that I think is very timing, unfortunately, but it's something that needs to be done, where you have an individual who is suffering a mental health crisis, and they are actually brought before a court to determine whether or not they're going to be committed to the state hospital, but for whatever reason they don't meet that high threshold. We've had in our statutes where an individual can in fact be ordered by the court to go into what's known as outpatient mental health treatment. What wasn't part of the statute that is now part of the statute that was part of Senate Bill 941 actually allows and actually requires the court to make a determination that while someone is under court order to be in mental health treatment on an outpatient treatment basis, should they be allowed to have access to firearms while they're under that court order receiving mental health treatment. That was another one that we wanted to have go into effect immediately, because this was a tool that was not set forth into the statute that makes it very clear now that a court should in fact make that determination, because as we all know, there is unfortunate that many of the tragic situations that we find ourselves dealing with as an individual, as a family, as a community, or as a state actually is when someone is in mental health crisis, and that they do in fact unfortunately have access to guns that can not only hurt themselves but also others. The last part of the bill is the one that it gets the most discussion on, and that is the closing the loophole on the background checks. For many people that did not realize that we've had a background check law, not bill, but law in this state for 25 years. In 1989, before Kitty and I were even contemplating being in the legislature at that time made a determination that they wanted and required that any guns that were being transferred through a firearms dealer, basically retail, were going to be required to go through a background check. So we've had that for 25 years. Fast forward to 2000, Ginny Burdick, to her credit, brought forward a second portion of that bill, which is dealing with gun shows. At the gun shows, you have not only licensed dealers, the retail sellers, but you also have private individuals. So since 2001, when the bill was passed, I should say when the initiative was passed in 2000, the following year it was implemented. And in 2001, and since then, we've had a requirement that anyone who's buying or transferring a firearm at a gun show also is required to go through a background check. The part that I think that's lost on the general public is that for those 14 to 15 years I'm speaking of, private sellers at gun shows were required and still are required to run a background check on a private buyer. So we've actually had private transfers required to have a background check, but it's been limited to those transactions that occurred at a gun show. So what 941 basically did was close the remaining loophole that says that we don't care if the private transfer occurs at a gun show or if it happens in the parking lot of the gun show or in someone's backyard or wherever. Those other private transactions are now going to be required to have the background check. So that went into effect in August of this year. I believe it was August 9th. We had a 90-day wait period to allow for the state police to be geared up to do it, to give everyone an opportunity to understand and appreciate what the law change was. But in some cases, what we've heard from the media, unfortunately, is that we basically put this requirement on all private transfers, but we're closing the loophole for those that are occurring outside of the gun shows. So I want to always bring that up to people so they understand that this isn't something brand new. This is just to close the loophole that was there and to ensure that felons and other criminals, such as people involved in domestic violence, as well as those who have been adjudicated by a court into a mental health facility, a state hospital, that they are going to be required to go through a background check, and they're not going to have easy access to guns. Now, one of the issues that came up to us and why we thought this was so important to close the loophole is that we know that many of the transfers that are occurring have been occurring through private sales that are through the internet. And every town, which is one of the national gun advocate groups, actually came into our state to help us facilitate, give us resources that we didn't have, and they put out some different publications. Actually showed ads that were on an internet listing, which is known as armslist.com, that basically said stuff like what the weapon was, and then it says no background check, no questions asked, cash only, and delivered. So you would ask yourself, who's going to be responding to those ads? More than likely people who are not legitimately can buy a gun through a dealer or at a gun show because of the background check. Some people have said, and so this is what we were basically targeting as another thing that we wanted to address. And I've also heard that many people said, well, background checks don't work. Well, they actually do work. Here's the facts. There's over 20,000 transfers of guns per month in the state of Oregon that lawfully occur. Let me say that number again. 20,000 transfers a month are occurring in our state. Those are lawful transfers, and I'm not here to say they shouldn't be. That's just to give you a perspective of how much activities actually happen. At the same time, approximately 1% of those that attempt to purchase a gun are denied because they failed the background check. So we're stopping approximately 2,000 transactions a year through this process. So we believe that by closing this loophole, we will in fact keep other individuals who are prohibited from having guns by law from having easy access to guns. So I was very pleased and very honored that my colleagues agreed that this was time to close this loophole, and we have done that, and time will tell. But I do believe, as Penny has said, that we will make it safer for individuals because we are going to limit easy access to guns to those who have been prohibited by law. Thank you.
We're here.
I'm Kitty Piercy, the mayor of Eugene, and
was accomplished during the session and the work of the advocates all around. Thank Tony for inviting me here. I belong for about, well, as long as it's been around, to the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, MAG, and which is now morphed into a collaboration with Everytown USA and the Moms group, right?
Yes.
And when we first started out, I think there were 20 of us, and now there's 900 of us. So we are making some progress across the nation. I would also say that in terms of what Floyd's talking about, you probably will remember that we had Officer Kilcullen here in Eugene, who was killed when he went up to stop someone on a traffic issue. And she was a person with some mental health issues and had a gun. And she just killed him. And so our chief and our community and his family were all very interested in trying to deal in some way at the state level with the issue of keeping guns out of the hands of people who don't have the mental capacity to use them wisely. The other thing I would say is, I guess you might enjoy that recently on the way down to actually offer sympathy and to the folks in Roseburg over the recent tragedy. President Obama came into our airport. The night before, I got a call and asked me if I'd go out to meet him when he's transferring planes. He's coming into Air Force One, and they can't take Air Force One to Roseburg because they don't have the right kind of airport to do that. So I said sure, and I canceled everything, and I went out there, and I thought I was going to do what happens to all of us, is when you get in a line with a bunch of other people, and you shake hands, and it's just like that. And then I realized I was going to be the only one out there.
Saw you.
Yeah. So I really thought I'd get about the chance to say about 4 sentences. So what were those sentences going to be? And I knew he was headed for Roseburg, or he was going to be facing a protest. So I wanted to say something about Eugene. I wanted to say something about thanking him for making this an important thing to him to go to talk to those families. And so I did that. And then I told him that I belonged to Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and that I knew he was working with them at the national level, and I wanted to let him know that we were here to support him. So that's how I used And then to add a little humor to the occasion, there's a kind of a cute picture of us laughing in a very unlaughable occasion. But the reason we were laughing is after we'd had this serious conversation, and Congressman DeFazio, Senator Merkley, and Wyden were on that plane too, and I welcomed them. And then the president turned around to me and he said, Madam Mayor, those ducks aren't doing very well, are they? And I said, Mr. President, they get better. And then I told him to have a safe journey. And so that's all that.
Well, thank you. And I just wanted to say also that, echo Mayor Piercy's comments, that having Floyd get this bill passed, Senate Bill 941, was a significant achievement of this legislature. And the fact that Governor Brown signed the legislation and Oregon does make a little advance in the face of a national failure to respond to this horrible set of circumstances of gun violence throughout the country and these horrible things that occur. I'll just say that my experience with this really started for me in the legislature, on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And another thing that really is currently on my mind, and it's maybe not quite as intense as Mayor Piercy's recent greeting with President Obama, but when President Clinton came, after the Thurston shooting, there was a motorcade of, and maybe you guys were in on it too, there was a motorcade of the Eugene elected officials to go with the president's motorcade over to Springfield. But after we got there, there was a gathering of the victims and their families. Now, there was a private meeting that President Clinton went to, but afterwards it was opened up, and the rest of the stuff on there, and it was really a moving thing to actually see the people. Maybe young Tony was there, I don't know. But that, for me, was a very moving thing to see the gravity of it with the victims and the I guess I'll say the number one policymaker on it. I'm really here tonight because of what happened in Eugene, in Lane County, after the vote, after the law was passed by the 2015 Oregon legislature. And that was, and just to make sure I didn't quote it wrong, I brought the Oregon Public Broadcasting website printout of the headline, which is Lane County opposes new gun background check law. Oregon Public Broadcasting on their website. And it discusses the fact that not only did the legislature pass this law, but the governor signed it into law. And after the governor signed it into law, then 4 of the 5 Lane County commissioners voted to condemn the law. And worse than condemning a proposed law, this is not just condemning a proposed law and saying, oh, well, we hope they don't pass this new law. This is, and we're not only saying we don't like this law, we're saying we're not going to follow this law.
They should recall.
Now, I'm going to tell you that the vote was 4-1. I did not vote for this.
Hear, hear.
Let me just say that defying state authority is not commonly what governments do. They should not be doing that, number one. Number two, the excuse given is, well, there was insufficient funding provided. When pressed, the chair of our board said it will cost us $60,000 per year to implement this law. Now, let me just mention what our overall budget is in Lane County. It is approximately $450 million. Thousand. Okay? Huge. Huge difference. And finally, I'll just say that I have a plea for you, and that is, it doesn't cost anything to vote in this society. It doesn't cost anything to vote. And I am actually not here in my capacity as a Lane County Commissioner. I'm here in my capacity as a candidate for re-election. And there are 2 seats up on our board. And I hope one of the votes you cast, if you live in the south half of Eugene, is for me. And I hope you vote for this guy right here for the north half. It would be nice occasionally for someone to second my motion down at the courthouse. So, and the final thing I'll say is that counties under Oregon law have a lot of responsibility for mental health. This has been touched on in our group, I'm sure all the other groups, that mental health and the failure of our society to take mental health issues seriously. Our suicide rate now in Oregon is, in terms of total numbers, bigger than our raw murder rate in Oregon. And do you see it when you turn on that 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock news, the equal treatment of stories about violent crime and the need for police services versus the number of people dying because of suicide? No, you don't see that. The public is not aware of it. They need to be, and mental health services need to be fully funded.
Hi, once again, my name is Charlie McKenna. I'm the local volunteer lead for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We're a national organization of roughly 3 million members. We have a very active chapter in Oregon and a very active local chapter here in Eugene. I just want to touch on a couple things that the politicians talked about here, and that is statesmen, and women, elected officials. I would call them politicians. You know, as Senator Prozanski mentioned, this bill that finally is now law took 3 times to pass. What changed? It changed as groups like Moms and Ceasefire Oregon and other advocacy groups changed the makeup of the legislature. We defeated anti-gun members and replaced them, anti-gun legislation members, and replaced them with gun sense legislators, and that's what made the difference. So you have the power to do this. So that's the key is, there's a lot of sense of hopelessness in this room and throughout this country over the sense of gun legislation, and the fact that the NRA has got a stranglehold on this issue and there's no change to be made. We've proven in Oregon that's not true. We can change the composition of the legislature, and because of that, we can change the results. The second thing that happened is after that law became signed into law by the governor, there was an attempt to recall 4 of the legislators that voted for it. Senator Prozanski was one of those 4. Our organization and others worked hard to defeat those recall efforts and were successful in all 4 cases. They did not get the required number of signatures to force a recall vote. So once again, the common person, people sitting in this room and people like you throughout the state affected change. So that's the thing, have hope. We can affect positive change.
So what I'm going to do is, I know every group kind of decided differently how they're going to report back on these questions, but what I'm going to ask is that we're going to start with the definition of gun violence. I'm going to ask, show of hands from people who are going to report back for their group. If you kind of hear what was generally